Do you wonder sometimes why we are talking so much about nutrition? My name is Bliss Lewis, and I'm an integrative psychiatrist. And let's talk about the changes in food that are causing this increased interest in food. So, the big change happened about 10,000 years ago with the introduction of agriculture. So, before agriculture, we were eating hunting and gathering, whatever we found, hunting animals, finding root vegetables, finding various leaves and plants and herbs that were edible. Then with the introduction of agriculture and population settling down, everything changed, right? That was the beginning of cultivating crops and cultivating a lot of grains, right? So before agriculture, we were mostly eating leaves. Post-agriculture, lots of grains, and also the introduction of dairy, right? So you were not really able to milk wild animals. Then with domestication of animals, dairy was introduced. So that was a big change 10,000 years ago. But then many more changes happened more recently, let's say 200 years ago with Industrial Revolution, 100 years ago, and then 50 years ago, introduction of certain new compounds, let's say high fructose corn syrup. And these changes are happening even on shorter timelines. And that is why we are struggling. It's a lot of change for our bodies to adjust to, and the human genome adapts, but not that quickly, right? So for some genes, maybe we were able to adapt in 10,000 years to the way we eat post-agriculture. But for some things, we're still catching up. Maybe it takes up to 30,000 years for us to evolve fully to the diet introduced 10,000 years ago with agriculture. And some of us are already able to digest the protein and the sugar in dairy, and some of us are not. But maybe in another 20,000 years, we will all evolve to be able to eat dairy, right? So we are evolving to eat the diet. But certainly, nobody can evolve quickly enough to eat new things that were introduced, let's say, 100 or 200 years ago, right? So what happens is our ancient genome is more or less the same, but food has changed in dramatic ways. And there are about maybe 7 key ways in which food has changed. And of course, it depends on how we group them and list them. But what are some of the huge changes? So some of the huge changes are the distribution of macronutrients. So the balance of exactly how much of the proteins, fats, and carbs we're eating now compared to pre-10,000 years ago is somewhat different. Micronutrients changed. For example, concentrations of certain vitamins and minerals in a food. What do you think? Are they higher or lower now compared to back then? They're lower, right? Because with industrial agriculture and the way food is mass produced, that food is not as dense in nutrients as wild food or food grown in healthy soils. So the nutrient content decreased. And also even in more recent research studies, looking back 50, 60, 70 years, the nutrient content in the food now is far lower than even a few decades ago. Another major change is glycemic index and glycemic load, right? So glycemic index, that's about how much sugar is released into our bloodstream after we eat a certain thing. Take a guess. Do you think we're higher or lower? Of course, we're higher, right? So before agriculture, we were not, sweets were in season at the end of the summer when there was some fruit, right? And now we have access to lots and lots of carbs and sugars year round. So overall, our intake of sugar and the loads of sugar that our body has to deal with is dramatically higher. Acid-base balance is also changed. Sodium-potassium balance is also changed. Certain composition of fatty acids, just what kinds of fats. Overall, maybe we're still eating more or less roughly similar percentage of our total calories from fat, but the type of fat, the quality of fat is very different. So this is about omega-3 to omega-6 ratio, and it used to be about 1-to-1, and now with the standard American diet, it could be, 20,000 to 1 or like 200 to 1, depending on how one is eating, but a lot more omega-6s and fewer omega-3s. So that's another big change, right? And there are more. And the accumulation of all these changes is what is putting a strain on our bodies, our minds, and our metabolism and our organs. We are just struggling to adapt, and we're struggling to deal with this new way of eating that, for this ancient genome is like a complete novelty. And that is driving diseases of civilization. That is driving the dramatic increase in obesity, in diabetes, in all kinds of inflammatory conditions, arthritis, things like that, in all kinds of autoimmune conditions, in all kinds of mental health conditions. Very long list of diseases which are connected to these major changes in how we eat. Also, how we live changed a lot. We are getting less exercise, we're exposed to many more chemicals, we're maybe more stressed in different ways. So it's not just food, but food is a huge component of why we're talking about food, why the health of the population overall is not great, and why it's so challenging to figure out what to eat. There are so many opinions about all kinds of special diets, and it's hard to navigate, it's hard to figure out what might be the right approach to food for you. But this was an introduction to why do we even need to talk about food.